Last one. Welcome back. This is week number 6. Yes, you've got it. This is our final week together. So once we get through this one, we've got it done. Okay. Finally, on this week, we're talking about semantics and pragmatics. Okay. Semantics means how and what words mean. So semantic variation means that words can mean a number of different things. So, let me give you an example. My name is David Esselstrom. Okay, so that is my distinction. So that's the lowest semantic level we can get to me. You could have maybe a scientific description of how my body functions or something, but that's really not that's not me. So that David Esselstrom, that name is the lowest level we can get. But I'm also a Azusa Pacific College professor. Okay, so if we look up at the semantics of going from something specific to something more general, okay, we've gone to something general here. Azusa Pacific College professor. There are a number of Azusa Pacific College professors. So I'm in this category now. So we've taken the semantic step up away from the specific thing. Semantics tells us that words have roles rather than containers. So words function in a number of different ways. And we saw that back when we were talking about grammar and talking about, say, verbs, which some verbs forms can function as nouns, depending on the sentence. Or let me give you another example. Of is a preposition, except in the sentence, of is a preposition. In that sentence, of is a noun. Okay? So containers, roles mean more or roles mean more than containers. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, there are a number of different lexical relationships. Now, lexical just means dictionary definitions. Okay, so we're talking about words, we talk about lexicon, we're talking about words and how they place things together. Okay, there are lexical relations. There are certain words that are synonymous, that seem to mean the same thing. So if I say dear and precious, okay, I'm saying words that mean the same thing. But there are also other relationships, such as homonyms, okay, words that sound the same. So dear and dear, that's a lexical relationship. I said dear, I didn't say dear twice, I said two different words. Dear, D-E-E-R, and dear, D-E-A-R. So these are homonyms, and therefore that's a lexical relationship that they have. Pragmatics, different from semantics. Pragmatics is just the scientific study of how meaning happens. Okay. So that we sometimes can make sense of something when there's nothing overtly that makes sense. For example, pragmatics enables you to say how graceful to someone when you don't mean they've done something graceful at all. Okay, you mean they've done something clumsy, they've tripped over their own feet. So you say how graceful. It doesn't really say what you're meaning. Pragmatics is a study of the situation, how that meaning happens. So it's not just what we say, it's when we say it and how we say it. So pragmatics is the study of how different meanings are created by different sort of tones and different situations, different facial gestures, different hand gestures. Okay, you get the picture here. Okay. Language varies over time. Okay, language changes as history, as we go through history, so that a word we use, let's say 100 years ago, might mean something slightly different. Okay, my favorite example of this is the term decimate. Okay, we use decimate, if you see decimate in sports pages, it usually is used to mean a team destroys completely. A team decimated the other team. Okay, the Lakers, decimated the Heat, and I hope they do. Okay, but decimate, if we look at it historically, if we looked at the etymology of the word, it comes from the Roman practice of destroying by 1/10, the same root as decade. So it doesn't mean destroy completely, it means just to destroy by 1/10. That's what it means historically and etymologically. That's not what it means in usage. And remember, usage trumps etymology. So, language also varies by region, so that different regions talk and say different things. If you're from the South, you use certain terms and certain words that we here on the West Coast don't use that often. If you're a New Yorker, okay, you use terms that we here on the West Coast don't use that often. Okay, if you let me give you some examples. Okay, for example, a Southerner will say y'all. Okay, so we don't normally say that. A Southerner will also call what we call soda, they will call pop. I used to hear that growing up. I don't hear that much anymore. It's also a Midwest term. New Yorkers have a certain way of dropping the R's so that a floor becomes a flaw. Now, these are just regional variations. It's not right, it's not wrong. Just a regional variations. For example, I had a teacher when I was in high school who was from Boston. So he remembers when he's talking about Boston Harbor, he's always talking about Boston Harbor. These are regional variations. Language changes with regions. Language also changes sometimes with social variations. So that different social classes, this is part of registers, different social classes will engage in a different level of discourse. It's not that anything is wrong, it's just a matter of things changing. So language and culture are intertwined, and as culture changes, language changes. For example, we are now dealing with the digital age, so that the words we use to describe the internet and cyberspace, okay, and texting and tweeting and friending and unfriending, okay, all of these things, these are words and terms that weren't here 20 years ago. They weren't here for most of them, 10 or 15 years ago. These are things that, since I am of a previous generation, I grew to manhood and to maturity, as much as I can call it that, in the 60s. So I'm dealing with this new and strange world all the time. Finally, or not penultimately, I want to talk about discourse analysis. Okay, and it's looking at how people talk and how people exchange information to understand what is happening when we are communicating. So what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do right now, is I'm trying to be coherent in what I'm saying to you. Okay, so how do we go from just uttering something to having a sense of coherence? And the only way that can happen is I have to have some sense of who I am talking to. So I have an intended audience up here. You are in my head. So I'm not sure exactly who you are, but I have a certain idea of what you are like, what you know, what you like and dislike. I have a certain sense of who you are, so I've made up that. That's the only way that I can be cohesive in what I say and be coherent when I'm presenting to you. Okay? There's also what I call talk inside of talk, so that sometimes what we don't say becomes more important than what we do say. Okay? If I teach creative writing, and I also teach writing for stage and for screen. Okay, and we always say that the subtext is more important than the text. The subtext is what the character is trying to accomplish by what he or she is saying. Okay, and he or she might be saying something that seems to be totally opposed to the subtext. For example, this is great. Okay, you're at dinner at a friend's house. Okay, and you've had a full plate of food, and you're hungry, but you could use a little bit more. Okay, and the friend says, "Oh, would you like another helping of mashed potatoes or another helping of the soup?" Okay, and you look and you say, "No, I don't think so." And the friend says, "Oh, yes, yes, please, please have another helping." And this may go back 2 or 3 times, because when you say, no, I don't think so, you're not saying, no, I don't really want a bowl of soup. You want to be coerced. So and your friend has picked up on that. And if the friend doesn't pick up on that, it's not a very close friend. Okay. So, that's talk inside of talk. Okay, we also have schemas and scripts, where we have certain ways of talking to certain people in certain situations. For example, a typical schema is here at Azusa Pacific, when I pass someone on Cougar Walk, I will say hi or hello, or I'll nod my head. Okay, that's a schema. Okay, if I say, and sometimes I say, how are you? Now, someone breaks that schema if when I'm passing him, I say, oh, how are you? And I'm moving along, and they grab my arm and say, well, let me tell you how I am. Okay. Now that's breaking out of the schema a script really that we've already established. And if we break out of that, that makes things awkward. Okay, and obviously this you all know when we talk about discourse analysis. Men talk differently from women, or women talk differently from men. Okay. Deborah Tannen is a scholar who worked in this area for quite some time, and once when my wife and I had read one of her first books out, we thought that she had been listening underneath the windows of our house and recording our conversations. Yeah. Men do indeed talk differently from women. And if you're a woman, you know exactly what I'm saying, and if you're a man, you haven't a clue. Okay, so that's one of the differences. Finally, language and technology. I told you language changes because of the technological changes that we're going through. The language changed a great deal because of the impact of print, changed a great deal because of the impact of television. It's changing now because of the impact of the computer and the internet. And there are winners and losers in this change that happens. I mean, the change is inevitable. We can't change the change. We can't stop the change. But we lose some things in that change. There's diminishing regional differences because of television, because of the ubiquitousness of television, that we all watch more or less the same programs. The regionalisms that used to identify us now are diminishing. Okay? One of the other things that's happening because of the impact of technology is a solidification of conventions. So, there are certain ways we do things that now become nationwide or actually worldwide. One, for example, there's a concept of lingua franca. Now, back in Thomas Jefferson's day, French was the universal language. So lingua franca just means, this is in its Latin term, meaning French, language French. That means it's a universal language that everyone speaks when they're speaking diplomatically. So Thomas Jefferson could converse in French and also corresponded in French, with people in England and people in France and people in other countries. Right now, English has become the lingua franca. English is the primary language around the globe. Okay. So that's another one of those things that has happened because of the solidification of conventions. And also, with technology, we have the introduction of, I gave you new terminology, but new conventions and new challenges. Okay. Facebook forces us to look at ourselves differently. The internet forces us to look at ourselves differently. Because of technology, I'm doing what I'm doing right now, which is different from what I accomplished as a teacher over my first, certainly 20, 25 years of teaching. But now I'm doing this because of the technological impact. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our time we spent together. I have. I hope this has been productive for you, and I wish you well as you continue the program. Bye-bye.